Hi, and welcome to One Life Matters, the podcast that reminds you that your life is worth living with purpose, joy, and authenticity. I'm Trish, a counsellor and life coach, and I'll be sharing down to earth conversations, insights, and tools to help you navigate the ups and downs of life. Whether you're healing from the past, finding your confidence, or simply wanting to feel more at peace with yourself, this is your space. Because you only get one life and it truly matters. Just before we get into this episode, I just want to mention that this podcast is for general information, insight, and reflection only. It's not a substitute for personal therapy, counselling, or medical advice. Have you ever found yourself looking at a relationship in your life, maybe someone you've known for years, decades even, and sensing that something just doesn't feel the same anymore? And it may not be because anything particular or dramatic has happened. There may not have been a big fallout, but just this quiet, persistent feeling that something's shifted. You know that feeling when a name pops up on your phone and before you've even read the text, your stomach just drops. Maybe it's a friend, a partner, or a group you've known forever. It might even be your own family. Despite your anxiety, you go into the interaction hoping it might be different this time, but somehow they always find that one specific nerve. They trigger you in a way that leaves you feeling like crap every single time. You might find yourself trying really, really hard, performing, over-explaining, or playing the peacemaker, but you still leave that coffee date or Sunday dinner feeling less than. You're irritated, you feel judged, and you're friggin' exhausted. It's the heavy, soul-deep exhaustion of trying to be enough for people who seem committed to seeing you as not enough. And what about those relationships that have simply run their course? The ones that feel hollow. There's no real depth left, and every conversation feels like really hard work. Sometimes it's not that the other person did something wrong. It's more about us. We often forget that we're allowed to outgrow the versions of ourselves that used to fit perfectly into those old dynamics. As humans, we are designed to evolve, but that evolution can be messy. You might wake up and realize you no longer speak the same emotional language as the people you've known for a decade. You've changed your values, your boundaries, or your outlook on life, and suddenly the old you that used to tolerate certain behaviors or fit in with just doesn't exist anymore. Today, we're talking about that heavy but necessary realization that just because you share history with someone doesn't mean they belong in your future. And I like to call this relational pruning. Sometimes, just like a plant, we need to trim back what no longer nurtures us so that healthier growth can happen. I think sometimes we tend to view holding on as a strength, but sometimes the real strength is acknowledging when the alignment is gone. It's not so much about rejecting people as it is about self-care, being authentic, and allowing yourself the space to grow. Think of it like a plant. For a plant to thrive, it needs to be pruned, right? It doesn't necessarily mean there is anything particularly wrong with its branches, but some parts are no longer helping the plant to grow. And in actual fact, they could be taking energy away from healthier growth. And relationships can be exactly the same. It's not always about toxicity or someone's bad behavior, although we get onto that a bit later. Sometimes it's simply about just not being a good fit anymore. And the relationships that were built around the old version of you, say 5, 10, or even 20 years ago, don't always align with the person you are now or the person you're becoming. And that can be really confusing and at times really sad because we're taught that certain relationships are meant to last forever. And there are times when we believe they will. But honestly, the hard truth is that some relationships are seasonal, some developmental, and there are those relationships that are lifelong. And as they evolve, you kind of grow together. Relational pruning isn't always about cutting people off in a sudden, harsh, or reactive way. It doesn't always end in a huge row and you giving someone a piece of your mind. It's often more subtle. You might not reach out as often. You might not see them as much, or you might feel less able to share as deeply as you once did. The letting go can be more gradual, but you're very aware of it. Now, I want to bring in a little bit of psychology into this. In my work with clients, fostering self awareness, healing, and healthy growth actually causes the nervous system to shift. So, what once felt normal might begin to feel uncomfortable, and what once felt familiar might no longer feel so safe. And this is really important to understand because as humans, we're wired for familiarity, not happiness, right? So if you've spent years in relationships where you've had to people please, walk on eggshells, or overgive, overcompensate, or shrink yourself to fit in and keep the peace, then those dynamics can feel strangely comfortable, even if they're not good for you. But as you begin to heal, something shifts. You begin to notice that you don't actually feel good after spending time with certain people. You don't feel like you can be authentic, or you feel drained after spending time with them. And instead of just putting up with it, your nervous system starts to say, this doesn't work for me anymore. And this is where relational pruning often begins. It's not that you're being difficult or expecting too much. It's that your internal system is literally recalibrating. You're no longer choosing what's familiar. You're choosing what is safe, respectful, and aligned. And that change, well, it changes everything. Now, this is the part that I think people struggle with the most because even when you know deep down in your gut that something doesn't feel right anymore, it doesn't make it easy. I mean, you might still love that person or at least care deeply for them. You might have years of history together, and so you find yourself caught in this internal tug of war, telling yourself how they've been in your life for such a long time, but the connection just doesn't feel good or right anymore. Or you don't want to hurt them, but by staying the same, you're hurting yourself. And then comes the guilt. Oh, that guilt. Particularly if, like me, you're someone who's empathic, caring, and maybe used to putting others first a lot of the time. You start spiraling. Am I a horrible person? Unfair? Selfish? Cruel? Am I expecting too much? But you really need to hear this. Outgrowing a relationship doesn't make you a shitty person. It makes you aware of how you react when something no longer sits right. You're noticing that quiet resentment that didn't used to be there. And you're starting to become aware that you have every right to protect your peace. And let's be honest about the grief, because we don't talk about it enough. It's normal to grieve the version of a relationship that used to work. You're grieving the connection you wish you still had and the person you still care for, even as you let them go. Allow yourself to grieve. It deserves that space. Okay, so let's dive a little deeper into how you know if this is something you're experiencing right now. So rather than a checklist, here are a few points of reflection. Maybe you feel a sense of dread at the thought of seeing certain people, and like I've mentioned earlier, you might notice that you feel drained after spending time with them rather than coming away feeling nourished, like your soul has been fed. Conversations feel surface level, maybe even forced and hard work, like you're not quite meeting in the same place anymore. You find yourself holding back, careful of what you say, or avoiding certain topics to keep things feeling comfortable, safe even. And there's a sense of emotional heaviness instead of ease and flow. And it may not be this obvious, maybe just feel different, less connected, less engaged, less like yourself when you're with them. But while this is going on, something else might be happening in the meantime. You start to notice or realize who your real people are, who you feel safe with, can relax around and be yourself with. Because relational pruning isn't just about what you're stepping away from, but also what you're stepping towards. It's about recognizing alignment. Some people fit who you were, some people fit who you're becoming, and not everyone will come with you on that journey. And that's okay. It really is. So I think at this point, I want to say something about a type of relational pruning that comes up a lot in my therapy room. And that's family. Because stepping back from a friend or partner is one thing, but family, it can feel almost unthinkable. We're raised on the narrative that blood is thicker than water, a silent, heavy code of loyalty that says we owe them closeness no matter the cost. Family dynamics are about survival instincts and deep rooted identity. But the uncomfortable truth is that being related to someone doesn't automatically make that relationship healthy or even safe. Sometimes the deepest pain comes from loving people who, for whatever reason, cannot love you back in a way that is emotionally steady, safe, or respectful. Stepping away from family isn't about punishment, rejection, or disloyalty, and it certainly isn't about not loving or caring for them anymore. It's about your awareness, about recognizing with sometimes painful honesty that even relationships with your family are toxic and damaging, or that your beliefs are no longer in alignment, if they ever truly were. You might decide not to cut them off completely, but to choose to change the terms and conditions of the relationship, which leaves you less vulnerable and minimizes the risk of being misunderstood, of walking on eggshells, not being good enough, feeling like you have to perform to be acceptable, and trying too damn hard. And that internal conflict, that guilt that you feel, well, that can hit harder than anything because it feels like you're breaking a sacred rule. Trust me when I say I know that feeling. But here is a shift in perspective. Guilt is often just the growing pains of a boundary. It's the feeling of your old loyalty at all cost self bumping against your new self-respect self. You aren't breaking a bond. You're breaking a toxic cycle. You're stepping out of a role you never signed up for in the first place. By choosing to prune those toxic branches, you aren't being cruel. You're deciding that your peace is just as valuable as their comfort. Now, we've talked a lot about the person doing the pruning, but I want to hold some space for a very uncomfortable possibility. What if you're the one being pruned? Being on the receiving end of someone else's boundary can feel like a sharp, cold rejection. It can trigger deep-seated shame, leaving you feeling disposable or like you failed a test you didn't even know you were taking. It's painful, it's bruising, and it's okay to admit that it really hurts. But if you find yourself being pruned, whether it's a friend pulling back, a partner leaving, or a family member setting a new distance, I want to offer you a different lens. Someone else's need for space is not a verdict on your worth as a human being. Often it's a reflection of their internal recalibration. They're moving towards what they need to grow and be happy. And sometimes the current version of your dynamic just doesn't fit that new landscape. Handling this with respect starts with acceptance. It's resisting the urge to chase, to demand explanations, or to lash out in defense. True respect means honoring their no, even when it leaves you with an empty space. It means sitting with your own discomfort and asking, what is this pain trying to teach me about how I show up in relationships? You can't force a connection to continue when the other person has mentally or emotionally moved on. But you can take the hurt you're feeling and use it as a prompt to check in with yourself, to look at your own patterns and perhaps break the cycles that aren't serving you anymore. Right, so how do we actually go about relational pruning? I think people often worry that they need to have a big conversation and explain everything, or to cut people off completely and permanently. And to be honest, yeah, I've been there in the past, even though it might have taken me a long time to reach this decision. I felt like I needed to lay everything out on the table because the repeated hurt ran for a little too long and a little too deep to rescue the relationship. I felt the need to explain how certain hard, non-negotiable boundaries had been shat on, just so I could walk away knowing I'd made my reasons crystal clear. I wanted them to understand exactly why I couldn't have them in my life anymore. But while sometimes all it takes is just one thing, or even years of hurt, it doesn't always have to be that extreme. And to be honest, I think most of the time it's not. It can actually look like subtly creating space between yourself and the other person, saying no a little more often, choosing when and how you engage, and allowing the relationship to shift without forcing it to stay the same. Sometimes, after a while apart, you get it back, and sometimes you don't, and that's okay too. And you are allowed to love someone and still choose distance, to appreciate what a relationship has been without needing it to continue in the same way. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes it's a quiet internal decision. This just no longer feels right, and that's reason enough. As we wrap up today's episode, I want you to take a moment to just sit with everything we've explored. I know that talking about pruning, especially when it involves the people we love or the family we've known forever, can leave you feeling a little bit raw. It's not a light topic. And if you're feeling that familiar tug of war between your heart and your head right now, that's perfectly normal and that's okay. We're often told that sticking it out is the ultimate measure of our character. But I want to challenge that. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do isn't staying until you're completely depleted. It's having the honesty to admit when a connection has reached its natural end. It's recognizing that you can't heal in the same environment that keeps you from growing or being who you really are. Remember, relational pruning isn't an act of cruelty. It's an act of deep, quiet integrity. It's you finally deciding that your peace of mind is no longer up for negotiation. When you stop overgiving to people who can't or won't meet you halfway, you aren't just losing a connection, you're reclaiming your own energy. You're making room for relationships that don't require you to perform, to shrink, or to walk on eggshells just to be accepted. So, if you're the one holding the shears, be brave. If you're the one being pruned, be curious. And regardless of which side you're on, trust that the empty space left behind aren't just gaps. They're the fertile ground where a more authentic, healthy version of your life is finally allowed to grow. You are allowed to protect your peace. You're allowed to outgrow what no longer fits. And you are more than enough exactly as you authentically are. And in the words of Hermann Hesse, some people think that it's holding on that makes one strong. Sometimes it's letting go. Thank you for joining me on One Life Matters. If today's episode spoke to you, I'd love you to subscribe and maybe share it with someone who might need it too. And remember, you only get one life, so make it one that truly matters. Until next time, take care of yourself.